At 6:30 in the morning, Valor Athletics was still cold. The overhead lights flickered on in quiet rows, revealing a pristine floor of interlocking mats that stretched from wall to wall. In the far corner, a woman moved slowly, guiding a mop in steady lines. Her sweatshirt was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves bunched at the elbows, and her gray sweatpants were baggy enough to hide the shape of her legs. Her blonde hair was tied back without effort, just enough to keep it out of her face. No makeup, no jewelry, no distractions. She didn't hum, didn't check a phone. She just worked in silence, dragging the mop through a thin trail of disinfectant and folding the towel over one shoulder. Claire Dalton didn't look up as the front doors opened. The first wave of attendees entered with the kind of presence that belonged in this building: sharp tracksuits, duffel bags with brand names stitched in gold, water bottles customized with championship decals. These were not hobbyists. These were the grinders, the metal chasers, and the self-styled kings of the mat. And Claire, kneeling near the edge with a spray bottle and a folded towel, did not exist in their world. A pair of coaches strode by deep in conversation. One glanced down, took in the sight of her crouched over a patch of mat tape, and kept walking. His voice carried without apology. "She's got the hardest job in the building. Better hope she gets under the mirrors, too. Nobody wants to smell yesterday's sweat at a seminar." Claire didn't flinch. She tightened the towel in her hand and wiped a streak along the edge of the mat. Her knuckles were pale, but her grip was relaxed. A young competitor walked in next, slapping hands with a teammate before pointing toward Claire. "Did they bring in volunteers for this one? That's new?" His teammate chuckled, adjusting the strap on his shoulder brace. "At least she's warmed up. Maybe she'll teach us the mop sweep." The jokes weren't cruel. Not really. Just careless, tossed into the air like pennies that never needed to land. Claire continued across the floor without comment. Each pass of the mop left behind a gleaming line. Every corner was done twice. She moved as if the gym were empty. The Valor Athletics logo was printed across the central wall in bold navy letters, surrounded by framed photos of national champions and black belt instructors. Underneath that wall, Claire paused and refolded the towel on her shoulder, eyes tracing the photos for a beat before she turned back to the mop bucket. One of the newer students, maybe a college wrestler, watched her for a second too long before muttering, "They could have at least given her a shirt with the gym name. Looks like she wandered in from the parking lot." The woman at the front desk, who had been checking registrations with a clipboard in tight efficiency, looked up. She saw Claire moving toward the main mat, mop in hand, and raised her eyebrows in mild concern. "Can you be done with that in 10? We're starting warm-ups at 7 sharp." Claire nodded once and kept moving. Her footsteps were quiet on the mat. Her eyes scanned for uneven spots, loose tape, stray fibers. Not a single person asked her name. By 6:50, the building had tripled in volume. Bags hit the floor. Hugs and greetings overlapped with stretches and last-minute warm-ups. On the far wall, a digital clock ticked towards 7. Claire finished the last pass near the north wall and emptied the mop water without fanfare. She folded the towel once more and placed it beside the bucket. No applause, no acknowledgement, just clean mats and noise. In a gym full of presents, Claire left no trace. Claire Dalton lived above a mechanic's shop on the edge of town, in a small one-bedroom with uneven floorboards and a window that didn't close all the way. In the summer, the air smelled faintly of oil and brake dust. In the winter, the radiator clicked and wheezed like it was learning to breathe. She didn't mind. Rent was low. The neighbors left her alone, and the building stayed quiet after sundown. The kitchen was barely wide enough for one person to turn around. Her mornings began with instant coffee and a slice of toast, always the same mug, always the same chipped plate. There were no decorations on the walls except a single photo by the doorway. It showed her standing in a white G, smiling with one arm draped around a taller man with the same sharp eyes. Her brother. They were younger then, fresh from a tournament in Atlanta, medals around their necks and sweat still clinging to their hair. He had passed 4 years earlier. The frame was clean, the glass uncracked, and that was the only thing she ever dusted. Claire didn't own much. A second-hand futon folded into a bed every night. Her closet held just enough clothing to get through a week. Tucked on the bottom shelf, beneath a stack of sweatshirts, was a neatly folded G. Beside it sat her black belt, wrapped tight and untouched. She hadn't worn it since the funeral. Not because she stopped training, but because something shifted after she lost him. She still remembered what it felt like to compete at the highest level, to step onto a mat with the roar of a crowd behind her. But those memories stayed folded, with the GI kept close, but no longer part of the life she lived. At night, after the shop below closed and the streets went still, Claire rolled out a mat in the corner of her living room. It was worn thin. The surface faded and the edges curled slightly. She stretched in silence, moving through drills by memory. Her body remembered what her schedule had forgotten. Sprawls, hip escapes, grip transitions. Then the rope came down from its hook. She climbed slowly, barefoot, her breath controlled and quiet. No clock on the wall, no music, just movement. Sometimes, she caught herself in the reflection of the window shoulders, strong, jaw set, muscles working beneath the plain gray fabric of her clothes. The city lights behind her were blurry, the glass fogged from the warmth of her breath. When she sat on the mat after training, legs folded, eyes lowered, she looked almost like she had years ago before things changed, before the name Dalton meant something to people outside her door. There were reminders, of course. A gold medal from a regional championship rested in a drawer beneath a stack of old paperwork. She hadn't touched it in over a year, not because she was bitter, but because she didn't need the shine. Claire wasn't rebuilding her life. She had already built it. Small, simple, and completely her own. She still received emails from old teammates sometimes. A few asked if she'd ever consider teaching again. Most just said they missed her. She never replied. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know what to say. The version of her they remembered didn't quite exist anymore. Each evening ended the same way. Claire folded the mat, hung the rope, and wiped the sweat from her neck with the same towel she'd used the next morning at the gym. She didn't train to stay sharp. She trained because the rhythm of it made sense, because the silence had never been empty. By 7:30, Valor Athletics was in full motion. The front desk had switched from quiet check-ins to managing sponsor reps, last-minute waivers, and phone calls that all started with the word urgent. 2 giant coolers of branded water bottles flanked the entrance. Each towel had been rolled and stacked with precision, bearing the gym's logo stitched in navy blue. Music pulsed from overhead speakers, soft enough to talk over, but loud enough to fill the silence between conversations. Every corner of the room buzzed with intent. In the main training area, athletes ran warm-ups in tight lines, jogging between cones and slapping hands with familiar faces. Coaches stood along the wall, arms folded, eyes scanning movement like they were already scoring it. Gym owners leaned near each other, comparing travel logistics and who had brought the most competitors. The air smelled of antiseptic, sweat, and something faintly metallic. At the back edge of the room, Claire Dalton moved without interruption, laying out fresh towels beside the wall rack. She worked quickly, without looking up, her hands folded with mechanical care, 2 towels at a time. A clipboard leaned against the supply table beside her, scribbled with names she didn't need to read. When one towel slipped off the edge, she caught it mid-fall, refolded it, and kept going. She had already cleaned the mats. Now she was setting the tools everyone else would use. The voices around her rose and fell, but none of them spoke to her. "He's coming in through the south door," someone said, loud enough to trigger a shift in posture across the room. Heads turned. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd like a current. Stretching paused. Conversations dropped. Phones were pulled from pockets. Claire didn't turn around, but she could feel the change in the room. Reed Warren stepped into Valor Athletics with the weight of reputation around his shoulders. He wore a fitted black rash guard lined with sponsor logos. His hair was short, trimmed clean along the edges, and his walk carried the slow confidence of someone who expected space to open for him. Behind him came a pair of assistants in matching shirts, one holding a clipboard, the other carrying a duffel bag with custom embroidery. Reed nodded at a few coaches, exchanged half smiles with others, and let the noise build around him like it was part of the show. "That's him," someone whispered near the back wall. "Three-time national champ, 8 straight golds. Nobody's even passed his guard since last year. He trains with that crew out of Miami," another voice added. "The one that does those invite-only Shark Tanks." A third chimed in, breathless. "I heard he submitted a UFC contender last week. Guy was out in less than a minute." Claire moved to the next towel stack, refolding a corner that had come loose. She didn't glance over. Near the center of the room, Reed clapped his hands once and raised his voice. "Appreciate you all being here. This isn't going to be one of those soft clinics. We're going to push hard today. Real rounds. Real pressure." Applause broke out immediately. The echo off the walls made the gym feel tighter, more enclosed. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "Let's go, champ." Reed gave a half smile, gestured toward the mats, and added, "But first, let's get loose. We'll do movement drills and positional entries before we start tearing each other up." Laughter followed. Not big or wild, just the knowing chuckles of people eager to be tested. Claire adjusted the last stack of towels and stepped away from the wall. She walked toward the storage closet, her sneakers soft against the edge of the mat. A few competitors moved aside for her, more out of reflex than recognition. Behind her, someone said, "Who is she? Haven't seen her around." "Probably one of the volunteers. They always pull in extra help for these things. No badge, though. Maybe janitorial." They didn't sound cruel, just casual, like they were commenting on the weather. Claire ducked into the closet and returned with a crate of training bands. As she placed them down near the edge of the mat, one of the assistants called out to her without looking. "Can we get a fresh stack of rash guards for the front rack? 2 sizes each." Claire nodded and walked back toward the office. No one asked her name. No one noticed how she moved, how her steps were balanced, how her posture stayed even, how she carried her weight through the hips like someone trained to stay grounded. The warm-up started with partner drills, frames, hip escapes, technical stand-ups. Reed wandered between pairs, correcting stances, offering praise when it counted. Phones came back out, snapping pictures of drills. The logo on his back stood out sharp against the white mats. His voice was clear, crisp, practiced. Claire stood at the edge of the mat with a rolled towel in her hands. She watched, not because she needed to, but because her body had already memorized every movement being taught. She leaned her weight to one side, listening to the chatter of athletes around her as they talked about tournaments, upcoming travel, training camps in the desert. Near the bleachers, a gym owner gestured toward Reed and said, "He's the future. Everyone else is just catching up." One of his coaches added, "I'd pay good money to see him handle a blindfolded match. He'd still smoke half this room." They laughed again. Claire didn't blink. The clock above the mirrors ticked past 8. Reed clapped his hands a second time and called out, "Let's get a demo up in 5. We'll start with a standard grip break and work into transitions." People moved toward the center. Claire stepped off the mat. No one asked her to stay. The seminar had settled into a rhythm. Reed Warren stood in the center of the mat, one knee down, hands gesturing through the opening moves of a grip sequence. Around him, athletes circled close, nodding along. His instructions were clear and confident, broken by light humor and casual commentary that kept the group engaged. Everyone watched him, even the instructors. Reed had presence, and he knew it. When he paused, brushing hair back from his forehead, One of the assistant coaches stepped in with a grin. "We need a partner. Somebody light and quick. Maybe someone who's already warmed up from mopping the floors." Laughter cracked through the room. The coach gestured broadly toward the wall where Claire Dalton stood, holding a clipboard and a folded towel. She had just finished restocking the bands and hadn't made a sound since the warm-ups ended. A few heads turned toward her. The laughter grew louder, sharper. "Come on," someone said near the front. "Let her have a go. Give the cleaning crew some mat time. She's probably better at wiping sweat than breaking grips," another voice chimed in. Reed smiled, amused, and shrugged. "Sure, let's see what she's got." It was meant to be a joke. Claire understood that before she took a step. But she moved forward anyway, placing the towel on the bench and walking barefoot onto the mat. Her posture didn't change. No awkwardness. No hesitation. She didn't glance at the crowd or shift her weight nervously. She just walked to the center and stood across from Reed. The noise died down slightly, replaced by whispers. Is she really doing this? She's not serious, just going to stand there and smile. Reed raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. You sure you're up for this? Claire's answer was quiet but clear. I'll need a blindfold. That stopped everything. A beat passed. Then the laughter came again, bigger this time, rowdy and full of disbelief. You what? Did she say blindfold? This is gold. Someone record this. Reed looked at her, amused but curious now. Blindfold. Huh? Claire nodded. If we're demonstrating technique, I won't need to see. The tone in the room shifted. Not all the way. Not yet, but enough that the second row of athletes stopped smiling. A few exchanged looks. One coach, arms folded, narrowed his eyes. Someone tossed a towel from the side of the mat. Make it dramatic. He called. We're all about the show here. Claire caught the towel midair. Her hands moved smoothly as she folded it into a band. Still silent. Still calm. She turned slightly, tied the blindfold around her head, and adjusted the knot behind her ears. Her hair caught the edge of the fabric, a few strands curling along her jawline. She looked almost like she was preparing for a quiet meditation, not a sparring session. Then she reached behind her and untied the drawstring bag that had rested near the edge of the bleachers. From inside, she pulled a black belt, faded, worn, but tightly wrapped. Without a word, she tied it around her waist with practiced motion. Silence fell in full. The laughter stopped. Reed's smile faded just enough to show his confusion. People glanced at each other, unsure of the tone now. It wasn't a joke anymore, or at least, it didn't feel like one. Is that real? Someone whispered. Where'd she get that belt? Another voice answered low. Nobody brings one unless it means something. Claire stood straight, hands loose at her sides, feet shoulder-width apart, the blindfold held snug across her eyes. Her breathing was steady, unshaken. Reed cleared his throat, looking around. All right, he said, trying to bring the energy back up. Let's keep this friendly. Just a grip demo. Nothing heavy. But no one laughed this time. In the back row, a brown belt leaned forward. His voice was almost a whisper. I think we're about to see something. The room stilled. The mats that had echoed with jokes and claps just minutes before now held their breath. Claire shifted her stance and waited. The mat was quiet. Claire Dalton stood blindfolded, the black belt tied snugly at her waist. Her bare feet found their stance instinctively. The silence around her wasn't respectful yet. It was uncertain, like the moment before a storm when the wind forgets which direction to blow. Reed Warren rolled his shoulders back and stepped toward her. His voice was light, but there was a thread of caution buried in it now. Let's make it clean, he said. Grip and flow. No need to overdo it. Claire didn't answer. She only adjusted her footing by half an inch and waited. Reed moved first. He stepped in quickly, controlling the collar and sleeve with crisp precision, expecting no resistance. But her balance shifted before he even made full contact. She absorbed the grip like it was wind against her shoulder, spinning just enough to change the angle, forcing him to reset. He blinked, then smirked, and moved again, this time with more weight behind it. She met his pressure with perfect timing. Her hips turned, framing his motion without force. Her hands found control points as if they were drawn by muscle memory. He reached for a trip, but she posted her foot and redirected, slipping past the angle like water folding over stone. A ripple went through the room. Someone whispered, "Wait." Reed exhaled louder now, shaking out one arm. He shot for a clinch and dropped his weight. Claire dropped too, but faster, cleaner. She underhooked, framed off the hip, and spun into a knee shield. No explosion, no speed, just precision. Her breathing hadn't changed. Reed tried to press her down. Her legs locked him in place. She reversed and posted, her right hand catching the edge of his elbow and creating a frame that guided him sideways, where he stumbled half a step. It wasn't dramatic, but the effect was unmistakable. Claire slid under, swept his base, and came up into mount before he even braced. The blindfold stayed firm. She kept one hand on his wrist and the other on the mat beside his head, weight low, posture unshaken. Reed bridged. She flowed with it, letting him turn just enough to bait the escape. As soon as he shifted, she swung to the back 2 hooks in seatbelt control locked before he even registered what happened. The gym had stopped breathing. Her legs curled around his waist like vines closing around a tree trunk. Reed's hands went to defense, but her grip was already climbing. She waited just half a second, then slipped her right arm across his neck in a clean rear-naked choke. No crank, no rush, just position. She tightened her elbow, adjusted her wrist, and finished the choke the way a pianist finishes a song without hesitation. Reed tapped. The sound of it echoed more than any slap on the mat had all morning. Claire released immediately and rolled back, landing softly on her side before sitting upright. Her breathing stayed calm. Her blindfold didn't move. Reed stayed on the mat, elbows braced, chest rising hard. He didn't speak. Someone at the edge of the gym dropped their water bottle. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. No one turned to look. Claire reached behind her head and untied the blindfold. She didn't rush the movement. The cloth fell into her lap. She folded it once, then again, and set it beside her on the mat. She stood slowly. Reed got to his feet, looking at her but not saying anything. He nodded once. Claire met his eyes without emotion and bowed slightly, then stepped off the mat. No one clapped. No one moved. The man who had joked about her mopping didn't speak. The instructor who tossed her the towel said nothing. People stood like they had forgotten how to sit. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling vent and the slow buzz of the exit sign light. Claire walked across the mat the same way she had earlier, quiet, even deliberate. This time, no one looked away. Reed Warren sat on the mat with his knees up and one hand braced behind him. His breathing slowed, but not steady. The gym around him had gone still. The energy that had filled the room earlier, the applause, the shouting, the small talk that danced between drills was gone. In its place was a thick, quiet weight that no one dared interrupt. Claire Dalton stood with the blindfold folded neatly in her hand. She bowed toward the center of the mat, then turned and walked off without a glance back. Her black belt was still tied, snug and straight, and her posture hadn't changed. No fist raised, no victory gesture, just the same calm, silent walk she had entered with. Near the benches, a young brown belt turned to a nearby coach and whispered, "Who is she?" The coach didn't answer right away. He squinted, like trying to bring a memory into focus. Then he said, "That's Claire Dalton." Someone nearby turned, "Dalton." Another voice added, "Didn't she used to run a gym out east?" "Her brother died," the coach replied quietly. "They ran it together. After he passed, she just disappeared. Nobody's seen her on the circuit since." A few others nodded slowly. Pieces clicked into place. The tone in the room had shifted again, this time not from silence to awe, but from uncertainty to recognition. It wasn't just that she had choked out Reed. It was that they had forgotten her. One of the seminar organizers stepped forward, clearing his throat before speaking. "Claire, would you be willing to stay and coach a segment?" His voice was respectful now, his posture more formal than before. "Or even come back next week? The instructors would be lucky to have you. Claire looked at him briefly. Her answer was simple. I appreciate the offer, but I'm just here to clean mats. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't smug. She said it like it was still true. And in some way, it was. Reed finally stood. He walked toward her, slowly at first, then with purpose. When he reached her, he paused, hands at his sides. You made your point, he said. His voice was quiet. There was no smile this time, no edge in the delivery. Claire looked at him, not with challenge, not with judgment, just level and calm. That wasn't the point, she said. He nodded once, then extended his hand. She took it briefly, then released. A few students who had laughed earlier now looked at the floor. Others exchanged glances without speaking. The loudest instructor from before stood with his arms crossed, no longer grinning, unsure what to do with his hands. Someone picked up the water bottle that had been dropped earlier and set it gently on the bench, as if the sound it made had been too loud for the moment. The space had changed. Not the walls or the mats or the light, but the tone. The air in Valor Athletics felt heavier, like something important had taken place and no one had quite figured out what to do with it yet. Claire walked back toward the towel rack. She picked up the one she'd folded earlier and wiped the sweat from her neck. She placed it neatly in her bag, then untied her belt and folded it the same way she had every night at home. No one dared interrupt. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. As she stepped past the edge of the mat, one of the younger athletes moved aside instinctively. Not with fear, but with reverence. He glanced down at her belt, then looked away, humbled. Someone near the office door murmured, "She was here the whole time, and we never saw her." And that was the truth. The seminar wound down slowly, like a fire that took time to fade. Even as the drills ended and mats were rolled up, the conversations never left the center. Claire Dalton had become the unspoken center of every glance, every whisper. Coaches huddled near the benches, discussing what they had just seen. A few approached her carefully, some with humility, others with tentative ambition. "We'd love to have you as a guest instructor next month," one said, his voice pitched low, almost apologetic. Another offered to sponsor private sessions, travel, accommodations. "We could put your name on the flyer. People would come just to see you move." Claire nodded politely, then declined. Not coldly, not dismissively, just clearly. She offered thanks each time, and then stepped back. She answered every compliment with stillness and every invitation with the same calm refusal. It wasn't that she didn't value the offers. It was that she didn't need them. By the time she left Valor Athletics, the sun was low and the sidewalks were tinted gold. She wore the same plain hoodie, the same gray sweatpants. Her duffel bag was light. No medals, no trophies, just a folded belt and a clean towel. She walked the long way home, past the industrial warehouses, the corner laundromat, and the row of fenced-in lots where old cars sat waiting for repairs. She turned down a quieter street near a community park. Across from the swings and the broken fountain, there was a small jiu-jitsu school, no sign on the door, just a white banner in the window and 2 fluorescent lights humming above the mats. Inside, a group of kids in white belts were finishing drills. One girl near the front struggled with the mechanics of a rear choke. Her arms were crossed too high, her hips too flat. Claire paused outside the glass. She didn't go in. She didn't wave. She simply raised her hand and mimed the adjustment one arm lower, elbow tucked, weight off the shoulder. The girl looked up, noticed the stranger standing outside, and mirrored the motion. Her instructor turned, saw her fix it, and nodded with a smile. Claire gave the girl a small nod, then turned and kept walking. The sidewalks grew emptier as she moved through her neighborhood. Her building came into view, faded paint, cracked step, and the familiar sound of a mechanic's playlist leaking through the wall below. She climbed the narrow staircase and unlocked the door with the key that stuck slightly, unless you turned it just right. Inside, nothing had changed. Claire set her bag on the counter, pulled off her hoodie, and washed her hands in the small kitchen sink. The water ran hot for a few seconds, then settled into a lukewarm trickle. She didn't seem to notice. After drying off with the same towel she'd used at the seminar, she walked into the living room and opened the closet. Her gi was still folded on the bottom shelf. She lifted it carefully, then placed it on the futon and sat down beside it. Her black belt, still warm from her bag, rested across her knees. She looked at it without touching it, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed. It didn't need to be worn to hold meaning. After a moment, she stood and unrolled her training mat. The corners still curled at the edges. The rope hung from the hook where it always had. The fibers frayed but strong. Claire stepped onto the mat barefoot, her stance measured, her breathing deep and quiet. She didn't start with drills. Not yet. She stood in the center of the mat, arms at her sides, and let the silence settle. The room held no crowd, no music, no praise, just a radiator ticking in the wall and the steady rhythm of her own breath. Then she moved. Simple transitions, shifts of weight, a slide into a guard pass, a smooth motion into side control. Each movement was deliberate, not to prove anything, not to repeat what had happened that morning, but because this was how she stayed whole. This was how she remained herself. Outside, the world moved on. Traffic lights blinked, street lights buzzed, someone shouted across the alley. But in her room, time was slower, cleaner. Claire didn't check the time. She didn't count reps. When she stopped, she sat back on her heels and folded the gi again. She placed the belt across the fabric and left them on the futon. She didn't need applause. She didn't need a spotlight. That wasn't why she trained, and that was never why she returned. The seminar room at Valor Athletics had been swept, cleared, and mostly forgotten by the time the last coach zipped up his bag. Mats had been disinfected. The water cooler was half empty. Folding chairs leaned against the wall in quiet rows. Yet something still hovered in the air, a stillness no one dared break. Near the back corner, where Claire Dalton had stacked towels earlier that morning, one remained, folded, clean, untouched. A student noticed it on the bench, hesitated, then walked it over to the mop bucket she had left beside the supply closet. He didn't say anything. He just placed it there, carefully, like a token laid at the edge of a monument. Nobody touched it after that. The gym didn't speak of her, not out loud, but every person who had stood on the mat that morning walked out differently, humbled, changed. Reed Warren remained behind a little longer, standing near the center of the mat. His hands were on his hips, his head lowered slightly. The ring of sweat still visible on the floor where he had tapped out had dried, but the memory hadn't. A few coaches lingered nearby, waiting for some kind of wrap-up. Reed looked up at them, then down at the mat again. His voice was softer now, without edge or force. "We came here to teach pressure," he said. "Turns out we were the ones under it." No one responded. They just nodded, and then they left. Across town, the windows in Claire's apartment glowed dimly against the early night. Inside, the room was quiet, as it always was. The futon had been pushed aside. The mat was rolled out. No camera recorded the moment. There was no music, no mirror, no one watching, just Claire, barefoot, eyes calm, arms loose at her sides. She moved the way she always did, grounded, precise, steady, a sequence of transitions, a shift in posture, a breathing pattern she never broke. She didn't train for competition. She didn't train to be seen. Outside, a car passed with its headlights sweeping the edge of her wall, then disappeared. The radiator clicked once and went quiet again. In the silence, she flowed into a guard pass and paused in perfect balance. Her breath rose, settled. "They laughed when I walked in with a mop, but I didn't come here to be seen. I came here to remember who I am." Claire Dalton never raised her voice, never asked for attention, and never claimed a title. but in one quiet roll, she reminded an entire room what real strength looks like. Not the kind that needs applause or spotlight, but the kind that endures in silence, sharp and steady. She wasn't there to prove anyone wrong. She wasn't chasing respect. She showed up, did what needed doing, and walked away unchanged, except for the truth she made undeniable. This story is about more than jiu-jitsu. It's about self-worth, about knowing who you are even when the world misjudges you. It's about how the strongest people are often the ones no one sees coming. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, quiet, powerful, and true, make sure to follow. The next one might already be walking in.